Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In today's episode, the first of a two-part series, I want to talk to you about secrets, why we keep them, what they do to you and your relationships, and what they reveal about the hidden parts of yourself. Before we get into what secrets actually are, I want to share why I'm bringing this up now. In my work with patients, I noticed that secrecy isn't just about manipulation, power, control, or hiding facts and experiences. Secrets often reflect something deeper about how we organize our inner world and relate to others. When it comes to narcissism, secrets become a lens into the ways that you or someone you may know manages shame, fear, and the parts of yourself that you feel that you can't show anyone. On a more disturbing level, secrets also become a way you enter into your own private psychic retreat, free of everyday painful feelings that come along with living in reality. And if that's not clear, don't worry, I'm going to go into that in far more detail because this is an important distinction when thinking about secrets. Talking about secrets helps us see that we're not looking at what is just hidden, but we're looking at why it matters for how you live, connect, and protect yourself. But let's start in a very general way, okay? What are secrets? Again, in general, if you think about it, every one of us carries them. They're thoughts, experiences, impulses, and memories that we choose not to share. At the most basic level, a secret is simply hidden knowledge, something we deliberately set apart from others. In the context of narcissism, secrecy often becomes more than just a personal boundary. It is woven into the structure of the self. Many individuals with a narcissistic organization live in, and I quote, a false self position, constantly managing impressions, pleasing others, and hiding unacceptable parts of themselves. Now, I did the quotes for false self because this concept originates with a renowned psychoanalyst, Donald Winnicott, who spoke about the true and the false self. Again, I'll elaborate on this as we go along. I want to make it clear that secrets exist along a wide spectrum, ranging from, if you don't mind me calling this, bear with me, I'll explain this, but ranging from ordinary omissions made to please a loved one or an authority figure. Maybe some people call this white lies or just being slightly dishonest, such as holding back an angry or dissenting opinion. But then on the other end of the spectrum, secrets encompass something that we would call identity-splitting lives. So one's identity can actually get split and organized around a concealed, compulsive behavior like gambling, substance use, shopping, or sexual acting out, just to name a few. In the more, again, I quote this, ordinary secrets, as if there could be ordinary secrets, but I think you see what I mean. And if not, this will become clear as I differentiate between the more serious, split-off sense of self with these ordinary secrets. So in the more ordinary secrets, these are far more common than living this double life. That's the other end of the continuum. And we need to think about both of these because in terms of healing or treating this, they're approached in a slightly different way. Or if you live with somebody who lives a double life, that's very different than somebody who has these, what I'm calling ordinary secrets. In the double life, hidden parts of the self carry the weight of fear, the fear of exposure, rejection, and the collapse of the carefully maintained, again, I quote, false self. In this way, secrets are not just things that we withhold. They're the core of the internal experience of living with a fragmented, split, narcissistic self, something I'll say more about later in this episode, because right now I want to get into why do we keep secrets in ordinary life. So that's a good place for us to start, and slowly we'll unpack this and go into the deeper layers of that split off self. There are countless reasons we keep secrets, some small, some enormous. Maybe it's hiding private romantic feelings, or something riskier and more serious, like an affair, a hidden addiction, or even a double life, which is especially common in individuals with narcissistic tendencies. Some secrets protect us from shame, embarrassment, or judgment. Others shield us from the loss of status, or what we could call, and I'm quoting, magical, the magical world that we've created and come to rely on. Again, that's more of the split off, fragmented sense of self. And I say magical because this is a world that may feel perfect, controlled, or idealized in our minds. Here you could think about the guy going to strip clubs, drinking, or hiring prostitutes. This is an idealized world. This is the magical world which gives him a sense of safety and mastery that he knows would vanish if it were exposed. Even when our secrets aren't as extreme as a double life or this hidden addiction, they can still quietly shape our lives. The small things we hide, the things we fear would change how others see us, or even how we see ourselves. Imagine a man in his mid-30s, engaged, wedding date set, life moving forward. On the surface, everything looks stable. He's successful, reliable, and I quote, a good partner. But he's been carrying a secret since his late teens. He was arrested. Maybe it was something impulsive, humiliating, or reckless. And here, you could fill in the blank. You can imagine something that you've held on to that's too humiliating from earlier in life to disclose to anybody. He served whatever consequence came up with his arrest, okay? But as he got older and he got his life together, he made a private agreement with himself. This part of me, that he got arrested, in other words, and was so ashamed of this, will never see the light of day again. He never told his friends, his past partners, and he definitely didn't tell his fiancée. Now, years later, the secret continues to haunt him as it returns in different ways. Can you imagine filling out a professional license application, a background check for a business partnership, or even signing up for something as routine as global entry or TSA pre-check, and suddenly a part of your past that you thought was long gone comes back to block you? And that's exactly what happens to him. Suddenly, when he's denied, he goes into a complete collapse, is overwhelmed with anxiety and panic. But it's not about the failed background check, although he thinks it is initially. The truth that he has sealed away, the one he buried under years of productivity, self-discipline, or a carefully curated image of himself as, and I quote, clean, pure, or perfect, is now standing in the room with him and with the woman he plans to marry, to whom he has to explain the failed background check. From the outside, this looks like a moral problem. He lied, or he should have been honest. But psychodynamically, the story is much deeper. So, what is this deeper story and the psychodynamic meaning here of secrets? This isn't just about information he withheld. It's about the meaning of that information inside his psyche. For a narcissistically oriented personality, that teenage arrest or past misdeed, again, you could fill in the blank here, doesn't just represent a mistake. It carries the potential for total exposure, humiliation, and collapse. It represents failure. It represents weakness, defectiveness, and shame. Rather than metabolizing that shame, the psyche walls it off. Perhaps a psychic territory develops. We could call it a secret chamber of the self. Remember before I mentioned splitting? And this is a split, right? So there's a part of him that stays inside, but is a secret chamber. It's kind of split off from the rest of the personality. Inside that chamber lives the belief, if anyone really knew this about me, they would see I'm unworthy. Or, love depends on maintaining the illusion I am intact, pure, clean, and responsible. So when he hides the arrest from his fiancée, it's not primarily I mean, in part it is, but it's not primarily about deception or manipulation. It's about protecting the fragile, grandiose self-structure. Remember, that's the main structure that holds the narcissist together. For those of you who have been following along, you've heard me say this many times. The part of him that must be seen as what? Competent, admirable, put together. The part that cannot tolerate being viewed as flawed in any way. The secret protects him from overwhelming what we call annihilation anxiety, the terror that the self, his identity, in other words, will crumble if this is ever exposed. Yet ironically, the secret also keeps him from true intimacy. His partner is relating to a partly curated version of him. It's not really him. It's not all of him. Of course, it's part of him. So yes, what I'm suggesting here is you can't have both true intimacy while also presenting, and I quote again, a false self, a polished side of yourself. To return to our example, you fail the background check, and now the past returns through an interview, a denial of some sort. Reality punctures the entire defensive structure. The grandiose structure is punctured. The false self, again, as Donald Winnicott would say, the false self is punctured. Reality always seems to get in the way. And suddenly, you're in a crisis. Who am I if this story becomes known? What if this gets out? This is the internal drama of the narcissistic self, or we can say the narcissistic false self, or secret. Secrets hold the defensive structure together, protecting the ego from contact with shame, vulnerability, humiliation, or guilt. And I'm not talking regular guilt, I'm talking persecutory guilt. But again, I'll say more about that in a moment. Secrets also form walls around the true self, the injured, the frightened, the young apart who once felt humiliated and exposed. Rather than being allowed expression, that part is sealed away and exiled. When his fiancée learns the truth, she's not simply reacting to the, and I quote, content of the secret. In other words, it's not about the arrest or whatever misdeed that you may have filled in. The past misdeed, and in this example, the teenage arrest, is not what she is going to respond to. She will react to the structure of the concealment. In other words, she's more likely to have a response, not to the fact that you got arrested when you were 17 years old, but that you kept this away. So the real injury is relational. The real injury is not about the content you have hidden. The real injury is what? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth? Why didn't you let me know the real you? Is this entire relationship a lie? Is it all based on a lie? And here's, again, if we think about this psychodynamically, here's the irony. The very thing the narcissistically organized psyche fears most is rejection or loss of admiration or love. And now that becomes more likely, not less likely. And that's the sad irony in keeping the secret. And this is the tragedy of secrecy in narcissism. So, unlike what you often hear in social media, I hope you're beginning to notice that I'm not looking at secrets as just a power move. Yes, secrecy can absolutely create power, control, and an asymmetry in the relationship. But here, I'm thinking about secrets as an emotional fortress built around regions of the self that feel too dangerous, too shameful, or too needy to expose. In working with patients, when we look at secrets through a psychodynamic lens, we begin to see something of real value. We see why the secret had to exist in the first place. In other words, why was it there? Okay, I hope you're with me thus far, because we have to pause here for now. If this is resonating with you at all, stay with me, because next week we're going to continue this discussion and deepen it by taking a more comprehensive view into lying and secrecy. I want to get more into that split off when someone really creates a false life, separate from their life at home with their wife and kids, for example. In part 2, we're going to look at the disavowed parts of the self, the fragile psychic equilibrium, and the internal persecutor that I mentioned earlier, right? What happens when a secret is held within you and it's not let out, not shared with somebody, and how that turns into an inner persecutory voice. Remember before I linked that up with guilt? Okay, but that's what happens when you carry shame or guilt alone. We'll explore all of this through a lived experience of why and how secrecy becomes a way of life, organized around protecting a grandiose self-structure from collapse. And what happens when those hidden parts are finally brought into a relationship or brought to the surface. If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.